The North Sea is a harsh environment. It's pushed technology and human resourcefulness to the limits. To benefit from the oil and gas beneath its stormy surface, the people of Great Britain had to develop new skills, build new communities, new industries. They had to embrace a new way of life. They were able to do so side by side with the old ways. They were able to preserve their environment and their quality of life. In fact, the oil and gas industry has brought countless benefits, not just to the workers in that industry, but to the whole British community. Let's look at how that came about. Back in the 1960s, Britain faced many economic problems. The biggest obstacle to growth was a shortage of affordable power. There was a real political will to develop the resources of the North Sea.
30 years ago in Great Britain, particularly in Scotland, northeast of England, there was a major industrial transformation which posed many economic and social problems. Shipbuilding was in decline, iron and steel, and coal mining. I think therefore the North Sea offered a major opportunity at exactly the right time historically for British industry to take advantage of North Sea oil exploitation, and also for us to use the real skills of our workforce in Scotland and the north of England.
The first impact was on communities like Aberdeen, the main city in the northeast of Scotland. Suddenly the city was full of incomers with money to spend. Hotels were full, bars and restaurants put up their prices. Local businesses started to do very well with this new injection of cash into the local economy. And that was just the start of Aberdeen's growth as an international oil capital.
And you've got to realise that we're coming out of the 60s, 1960s, when the biggest export from this area was people, young people, qualified people. So when the industry arrived, this was the turning point in terms of stemming that flow. And from 1969 onwards, when the first oil strike was made, but very early on, the local people, councils, etc., were able to see that this was going to be the start of a big area of change.
The companies that were here before oil and gas have had to modify themselves to cater for oil and gas, and have done that very successfully.
The service providers we worked with were local suppliers who, for example, provided the labour at the dockside, crews for standby boats, provided the staff at the airport.
When you have large companies coming into an area, in oil and gas or any other industry, they do need an infrastructure locally. They can't import everything. So there has to be a homegrown culture and homegrown industry in behind it.
Onshore, there was a little bit of resentment from some of the British people because they thought we were taking their jobs, but in actual fact we were getting them trained to take over those jobs.
Immediate challenges certainly we're trying to estimate very early on, which is quite hard, what the scale of this industry was going to be. Was it going to be around for 5 years and maybe not work out, or was it going to be around for 20 or 30 years as it actually has been? And based on that, therefore, how much land was going to be needed? Land for industry, land for housing, and more than just the area of land needed, how could you service that land for roads, for water and drainage? The County Council were quite optimistic and positive, and actually took quite a gamble at that time in terms of ensuring there was this area of land available. City Council also at that time were very futuristic in terms of dealing with Aberdeen Airport and dealing with Aberdeen Harbour.
The initial fears we had with the oil industry, I suppose, was loss of access to areas. We did worry about pipelines and the areas around oil rigs and wellheads, but that was just early worries, and it kind of progressed that even that really didn't cause us a problem.
Great care was taken to minimise the environmental impact. Today it's almost impossible to tell where pipelines come ashore. In fact, traditional industries continued side by side with the new. Oil and gas had a significant impact, but it didn't displace older traditional industries like farming, whisky distilling and fishing. Sustainable development was very important. The small provincial fishing town of Peterhead is a major energy hub for the UK. It hosts Europe's largest gas gathering plant and a large gas-fired power station, but still went on to become the largest whitefish port in Europe. The environment has been protected throughout, and this is down to three things: corporate responsibility on behalf of the oil industry, good planning decisions by government and the local authorities, and the engagement of the local community.
We've been farming here for nigh on 40 years. We're on quite a bit of livestock, as you can see in the background here. Oil and gas has certainly brought prosperity to our area, I doubt if it's brought much extra prosperity to farming, but there's been no downside, I don't think. The real fear in the area was it would get a huge influx of people. It would be everywhere, but luckily that didn't happen. Basically, the original oil men were all ranchers, and they were all farmers of one sort or another, and we're getting along quite nicely.
But although the impact was managed, there was a substantial influx of people into the northeast of Scotland. First, there were thousands of temporary workers involved in exploration, drilling, and the construction of platforms. Then there was a substantial growth in more permanent incomers.
There was major housing development in Aberdeen, and not only in Aberdeen itself, but within about 15 miles round Aberdeen there was a ring of towns, and they were able to become major settlement centres. And if you go to these towns now, up to maybe 30 or maybe even 50% of the folk who live in these towns travel to Aberdeen, and much of that travel is linked to working for the oil and gas industry.